Sometimes there's a glitch in the matrix, where the limitations of the old operating system are laid bare and something new pokes through. There have been dozens of responses to the Jordan Peterson Channel 4 interview already. What makes this one different? Well, I have a pretty unique perspective. In October last year, I went to Toronto to interview Jordan Peterson at his home.
You came in from where?
I came in from London last night. I turned the interview into the first full-length documentary about Jordan Peterson's ideas. I was pretty sure he'd soon become a lot more famous and be recognised as one of the most significant public thinkers. But I couldn't possibly have predicted how he'd break through to a mass audience. A few weeks later, Peterson did an interview with journalist Cathy Newman on Channel 4 News in the UK, a programme I worked on as reporter and producer for 10 years. It was a sensation. Millions watched it online. Tens of thousands commented. An overwhelming majority felt Peterson had been unfairly represented. And in the weeks since, it hasn't stopped. Peterson has been asked about it constantly on the most high-profile online shows.
12 rules for life. So without reading this, so what you're saying is, that's what I like.
There's only 12 things you need to know in life, right? That's it?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
This interview that you just did with this woman, Cathy Newman, was that in the UK?
It was Channel 4, UK.
So what does this glitch say about the state of mainstream media and the culture at large?
That's my diagnosis of what's actually happening, is that people are moving further and further away from what thinking actually is, and more into merely running a script.
And what does Jordan Peterson actually think that's so controversial?
You are misrepresented more than anyone I know, in a weird way. You are villainized in a weird way, where I can't believe that these people are honestly looking at your opinions and coming up with these conclusions.
I believe this encounter struck such a nerve because it's a cultural watershed moment. Seen properly, as Peterson would say, it's archetypal in that it contains layers and layers of meaning that go right to the heart of the biggest rifts we're seeing playing out in the culture. Over the next 50 minutes, I'm going to do my best to unpack it. From the clash between new and old media.
This is also why YouTube is going to kill TV. Because television, by its nature, all of these narrow broadcast technologies, they rely on forcing the story.
All the way down to the mythological and archetypal level.
I thought of ideologies as fragmentary mythologies. That's where they get their archetypal and psychological power. But in the postmodern world, and this seems to be something that's increasingly seeping out into the culture at large, you have nothing but the tyrannical father, nothing but the destructive force of masculine consciousness, and nothing but the benevolent great mother. And it's an appalling ideology, and it seems to me that it's sucking the vitality, which is exactly what you would expect symbolically. It's sucking the vitality out of our culture.
And to ask, how do we move forward constructively rather than just adding to the polarisation? I've been a journalist for 16 years, in the newsrooms of the BBC and Channel 4, and then making documentaries. I moved away from the front line of news some time ago and started learning psychology, which is what first drew me to Jordan Peterson. From a distance, I've started to see the blind spots of the establishment media much more clearly. I spent some of the best years of my working life at Channel 4 News and have a huge amount of respect and gratitude to the programme. But I'm making this film because I feel so strongly that if we can't have open conversations about the kind of topics Peterson is raising, we're in serious trouble. Peterson is one of a new breed of thinkers made famous almost completely by the internet, not the broadcast media. Part of a powerful new informal network being called the intellectual dark web.
The mainstream media is based on an old dying model that is being replaced by new media and new technology so quickly that its faults are becoming glaringly obvious. Fortunately, thanks to YouTube, podcasting, and however else you get shows like this one, the mainstream media's stranglehold on information, which really is a stranglehold on your ability to think clearly about the issues of the day, is crumbling at an incredible rate. Now the question is who and what will replace it? A few months ago, one of my favorite people to sit across this table from, Eric Weinstein, came up with the phrase intellectual dark web to describe this eclectic mix of people, from Sam Harris to Ben Shapiro to his brother Brett Weinstein to Jordan Peterson, all of whom are figuring out ways to have the important and often dangerous conversations that are completely ignored by the mainstream. It's why I would argue that this collection of people are actually more influential at this point than whatever collection of cable news pundits you can come up with. If you think I'm being hyperbolic about the growing influence of this group, just check the traction that these people get on Twitter or Facebook compared to our mainstream competitors. Twitter may not be real life, as I say in my Twitter bio, but it is some barometer of what the zeitgeist is right now.
What unites this group of thinkers is a sense that the set of ideas that have run Western culture for years are breaking down, and that the chaos of the moment is the attempt to find new ones. It's nearly all happening online.
Part of the problem that we have right now in our culture is trying to diagnose the level at which the discussion should be taking place. And I think the reason that this is a tumultuous time is because it actually is a time for discussion of first principles. And it's that, and
Yes.
First principles are virtually at the level of theology, right? Because first principles are the things that you assume and then move forward. It's like, well, what should we assume? Well, the dignity of the human soul. Let's start with that. You can't treat yourself properly without assuming that. You can't have a relationship with another person. You can't stabilize your family. You can't have a functional society. So what does it mean for this human soul to have dignity? Well, the part of the idea is that you're participating in creation itself, and you do that with your actions and your language. And you get to decide whether you're tilting the world a bit more towards heaven or a bit more towards hell. And that's actually what you're doing. So that's a place where the literal and the metaphorical truth come together. And people are they're terrified of that idea, as they should be, because it's a massive responsibility.
They also argue that the central problem is polarization, boosted by social media. Peterson's work looks at how people are hardwired to see the world differently.
A lot of what determines your political orientation is biological temperament, far more than people realize. So, for example, left-leaning people, liberals, let's say, although that's kind of a misnomer, but we'll keep with the terminology. Liberals are high in a trait called openness, which is one of the big 5 personality traits, and it's associated with interest in abstraction and interest in aesthetics. It's the best predictor of liberal political leaning. And they're low in trait conscientiousness, which is dutifulness and orderliness in particular. Whereas the conservatives are the opposite. They're high in conscientiousness, they're dutiful and orderly, and they're low in openness. And that makes them really good managers and administrators, and often businessmen, but not very good entrepreneurs. Because the entrepreneurs are almost all drawn from the liberal types. And so these are really fundamentally biologically predicated differences. And you might think about them as different sets of opportunities and limitations, and certainly different ways of screening the world. And each of those different temperamental types needs the other type. Let's call this a diversity issue. If you start understanding that the person that you're talking to who doesn't share your political views isn't stupid, that's the first thing, necessarily. They might be, but so might you be. Stupidity isn't the differences in intelligence are not the prime determinant of differences in political belief. All right, so you might be talking to someone who's more conscientious and less creative than you if you happen to be a liberal. But that doesn't mean that that person's perspective is not valid, and it doesn't mean that they wouldn't outperform you in some domains, because they would. So one thing to remember is people actually do see the world differently. It's not merely that they're possessed of ill-informed opinions. The whole point of a democracy is to continue the dialogue between people of different temperamental types, so that we don't move so far to the right that everything becomes encapsulated in stone and doesn't move, or so far to the left that everything dissolves in a kind of mealy-mouthed chaos. And the only way that you can navigate between those two shoals is by
is through discussion, which is why free speech is such an important value. It's the thing that keeps the temperamental types from being at each other's throats.